Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Bodybuilding Legends Show. I hope you're really enjoying this series of interviews that we're doing on the Bodybuilding Legends Show. It's getting a lot of great response from around the internet, so I know a lot of people are enjoying this show just as much as I am. On today's show, we have our second part of our interview with Boyer Coe. Boyer Coe was one of the most successful bodybuilders of the 1970s, and his career lasted all the way from the 1960s when he started competing as a teenager up until the 1990s when he competed in the Masters Mr. Olympia contest. On today's part of the interview, Boyer is going to talk about the 1980 Mr. Olympia, which he was a part of. He took fourth place in that very controversial competition. He's going to talk about what happened backstage at the competitors meeting with Arnold and Mike Mentzer and of course Boyer himself. And then he's going to talk about his feelings on the contest. He's also going to talk about the 1981 Mr. Olympia, where Boyer and Frank Zane and Mike Mentzer decided not to do the show, and they tried to get other people to boycott the show. And then Boyer is going to share some interesting recollections of his relationship with Arthur Jones, the inventor of the Nautilus machine. Arthur was a pretty eccentric person, and Boyer's got some great stories to tell about that. And then finally, Boyer is going to tell us about his training and his diet and his preparation for the 1994 Masters Mr. Olympia, where he took third place behind Robbie Robinson and Lou Ferrigno, and he competed at his biggest competition weight ever, competing at about 228 pounds. So it's going to be a great interview with Boyer Coe. If you saw part one of the interview with Boyer, you saw how open and honest he was, and it was a really great interview. So we're going to really enjoy this interview, part two of the Boyer Coe interview. We're going to hear from our sponsors right now, and when we come back, we're going to be joined by Boyer Coe on the Bodybuilding Legends Show. We'll be right back. So let's go to the 1980 Mr. Olympia now. This was the big controversial Olympia. I know you and I have talked a little bit about this by email, and now it's like 35 years later, and this is still probably the most controversial, one of the most controversial Mr. Olympias ever. Did you know that Arnold was going to compete in that show before the contest?
You know what? If I'd have been smart, I would have realized, but I was a dummy. I didn't. I was so. Let's go back. Let's back up to the first Miss Olympia contest.
Right.
Which was in 1980 in Philadelphia. George Snyder put it on. Okay. So this is shortly before the Mr. Olympia, and you had myself, Frank Zane, Mike Mentzer, and I think Ron Tufel, guest hosts. Okay. So we're all in good shape. And that was right after Frank had his accident.
Yeah.
So he was lacking, okay? Because he'd been in a hospital for about 10 days. He had lost a lot of weight. And Arnold was there, and we had a trade show. It had supplement companies. I was with Body Masters, so we had our equipment on display there. And I recall Arnold, it was so important for Arnold not to miss a workout that he was down there working out in the area where we had the trade show. And he had a film crew following him around. I never paid any attention to it. So I just totally dismissed it. And then I remember George Snyder, because I did a lot of business with George Snyder. He had Olympus Health Clubs at the time, and
Right.
he was franchising. We sold a ton of equipment to those guys. So I was on the phone with George almost every day. And he's saying, he says, I know who's going to win the Mr. Olympia. He said, I got it written down and I got it on a piece of paper locked in my safe. I said, well, that's good. I'm amazed that you know who's going to win. I never thought about it. But you got to remember, in those days, they had a thing called the association. It was Arnold, George Snyder, Franco Colombo, and Bill Drake. Okay? But I'm not, maybe I'm just naive in those days. Never paid any attention.
What was the association, Boyd?
Well, in other words, what they did, they formed an association where you got a discount on supplements, gym equipment, and sports clothing and stuff like that.
Okay.
And then they would get a piece of it. So, I mean, I sold them a lot of equipment at a discount, and they in turn, turned me on to customers. And I'm sure that the supplement companies and on down the line did the same thing. But to answer your question, I didn't realize that Arnold was going to enter the Mr. Olympia until the night before, because Bill Pearl called me. Told me, he said, I just want to let you know Arnold's going to enter the contest. I said, well, yeah, okay. And then, and I know this has been discussed a million times, and people will argue about it. And you're right, it's over 30 years old. I don't know why people continue to argue about it. And their opinions are very strong, but you got to remember, opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one,
Right.
But and most of the people that want to argue about it so energetically weren't even born in 1980. But the thing is this. I remember sitting back there at the pre-judging, and Mike Mincer and I are sitting there talking, and we see Arnold, and the best way I can describe it, he looks thin. And I even remember telling Mike, I said, I don't know why Arnold's doing it. This is a shame. He's going to lose. Why ruin risk his reputation? Everybody had high regard for Arnold. Well, fast forward as it turns out, Arnold won. And everybody makes big deals about Mike and Arnold almost coming to blows at the pre-judging meeting. That was, the thing was how it all got started, and I'm sure you've heard it.
Yeah.
We had all agreed the year before there would be no height classes. No, it's an open contest.
Yeah, no under 200, over 200.
Yeah, and I explained that to Ben Weeder, and he says, you're absolutely right. We're just going to have one. So we get there, and Arnold says, no, we want two classes. So whatever amount of people they had in the contest, maybe they said they had 17 people in the contest. So we all voted ahead of time. 16 people said, no, we want it open. Arnold wanted two classes. So trying to be a diplomat, I stood up and I said, okay, Arnold, we're going to give you the floor. Explain to us why you think it's going to be, you want two classes. What's the reason? And instead of saying, okay, well, boy, this is my reason, he says, well, why don't you talk like a man? And I'm thinking, well, hell, I've given you an opportunity to say something. And that's when Mike blew up. I guess he had gotten tired of it. He jumps in there. And then it probably would have come to blows because Mike was pretty mad. Mm-hmm. Had Bill Pearl not stepped between Mike and Arnold, all hell would have broke loose. And the way Arnold was sitting, and if Mike would have hit him, it would have taken Arnold's head off because he was right over him, and Arnold was just sitting down with his hands. Right. But I mean, as it turned out, everybody. I will think this in retrospect. If Arnold had to do it over again, he wouldn't have done it because it cost him a lot of friendships, and it definitely colored his reputation. Mm-hmm. Maybe not quite as mad as the thing having an illegitimate kid with the maid, but nevertheless, it put him down a much lower notch in the guys that had always held him in high regard.
What did Arnold say to Mentor to get him so mad? Where Mentor came walking over to him?
Well, he gets off the subject. He says, "Well, everybody knows why you didn't win last year." He says, "Your gut's too big," and that's when it really got started.
Okay.
I think if I remember correctly, Mike might even cocked his arm back. He was ready to punch him.
Really?
That's when Bill Pearl stepped between.
So Bill Pearl was the one that stepped in and stopped it.
Yeah, exactly. Bill Pearl was, and then after Ben Weeder saw that it was safe, then he jumped in and tried to. But he was very careful not to get in between Mike and Arnold right away. It
Until the
was Bill
timing was
Pearl.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
So going through the prejudging of that show, then did you feel like Arnold? Well, you said he wasn't at his best. Did you feel like he had a chance to win? Who did you think was going to win the show?
Well, it's interesting to, and only I can offer you an opinion.
Yeah,
I would say this. Once again, I thought Chris looked good, and Chris obviously came out second.
yeah,
But I never picked Chris as the winner. I don't know why. Frank was in good shape. He had improved a lot since 2 weeks ago at the Miss Olympia, but he was still a little thin. I thought Mike was in excellent shape, and I was in excellent shape at the. So I don't think anybody. I can't recall Mike or anybody else saying I should have won the Mr. Olympia.
yeah.
But everybody was in agreement that Arnold shouldn't have won.
Right.
There was if honestly, if I would have been a judge, I would have had Arnold probably somewhere around 6th or 7th place. Yeah, I tell you, the guy who has researched that and done a meticulous job on that, if you ever want to read what really, really, really went on, is read some of Randy Roach's books.
Oh yeah, Randy's great.
Yeah, he is the absolute best. I mean, he and I became friends just talking on the phone, you know. And I never met him, and I didn't realize the guy was blind.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
In the world does he do this?
I know.
So there was a seminar in Cleveland, Ohio, and he was going to. I said, you know, Randy, I want to meet you. I'm going to fly to Cleveland just to meet you. And first, what a nice guy, you know. And I don't particularly agree with everything he says on nutrition because he's big into raw foods.
Yeah.
He eats everything raw. I like meat rare, but I don't like it completely raw.
Right. Yeah, for those that don't know what we're talking about, Randy Roach wrote a series of books called Muscle, Smoke, and Mirrors, and he's written 2 volumes, and right now he's writing volume 3. And I know he's actually interviewed me a little bit because I went to the 1981 Mr. Olympia and I saw that show. So he was asking me my opinions on that. But I know he's talked to you a lot and he's talked to many other people in the sport. And for those people that haven't read those books, they're really well researched and they're very big books. And he's putting a lot of effort into them. So I hope more people support him and read his books because they're really amazing.
Well, if anybody's got a real love, a real passion for bodybuilding, that ought to be required reading for them.
Yeah.
You made a remark a little bit earlier that you talked about the 1980 Mr. Olympia being the most controversial. I respectfully disagree with you. I think 81 was probably the most controversial because, as the story goes, we decided, hey, we don't want to be a part of this. I knew in advance.
Yeah.
The whole year, I said Franco was going to win the contest, and everybody said, "Oh no!" And even I remember saying, this would have never happened if this contest would have been in America. And it would not. It shows you how wrong I was. The next year, the same thing happened again. Now you were there, so I can't really comment on it. Only you can comment on that contest. But from what I understood, there was a lot of unhappy people in the audience that night.
Yeah, that was, I think, the most controversial contest I've ever seen in person. I wanted to ask you, Blair, about going back to 1980. Some people may not know this, but CBS television was there to film the show. As back then in the late 1970s, ABC Wide World of Sports was usually filming the Mr. Olympia, and then NBC and CBS got involved. And then CBS was there filming it in 1980, and then that footage was never used. And you did get to see that footage, though, didn't you?
I did. I was. There was only 4 people that I recall saw that footage. But this is what happened prior to the Mr. Olympia. CBS sent a film crew and spent 2 days with who they assumed might be the top competitors. They spent 2 days with Mike Mincer, 2 days with Dennis Tenorino, 2 days with me, and there might have been 2 days with Chris Dickerson. I'm not quite sure. So that film crew, I knew they had been to my home, spent the whole day with me, and then that same film crew went over to Sydney to film the contest. And God, let me think of the guy's name. I remember the guy that was there, his name will come to me in a minute, but he was there, and he called me in Sydney after the contest, and he says, I'd like to have a meeting with you and Frank and Dennis and a couple of other people. He said, we're never going to be able to show this on TV. He said, it's just too controversial. So, I said, okay, that's just the way, that's the end of it.
Now, why did he say that, Blair? Why did he say it was too
Because
controversial?
it was obvious to him that Arnold didn't deserve to win, and they didn't want to put something so controversial, even to the average person sitting in the audience, to realize, hey, something's wrong here. This is not right. So I never thought any more about it. So Sherm Egan, that was the guy's name. He was the guy that was producing the thing for CBS. So somehow or another, he calls me later that year because I'm in New York, and he says, if you'd like to see the uncut version, the unedited version of this thing, he says, meet me at CBS, and I'll let you watch it. So I contacted Wayne, his wife at the time, Karen, Chris Dickerson, and one of Chris's buddies. We went and watched the thing. And I didn't realize what a great difference it was until you're sitting watching the thing. And that's when it really was apparent, hey, something is wrong here. And they said, this is it. We're not going back. So even though they paid the sanction fee for 1981, they never went back. And as far as I know, they've never filmed anything related to bodybuilding ever again.
So what was your opinion of the footage, Blair? What did you say when you saw it?
Well, I mean, it stuck out just as much as I had experienced. I mean, Arnold was by far not in his best shape. And as I said, two things I noticed that stood out in watching Arnold. He looked thin, okay, but he also looked unbelievably nervous. He was not confident. He's always been noted for being very, very confident in charge. He was not. Even with all the judges in his pocket, he was still unsure of how the crowd was going to react, and they did react quite negatively when they announced the results of the contest. But it didn't affect him. He went on. I mean, let's give him credit. I remember Mike Visser telling me, and this was in 1981. He says Arnold was in the Rose Cafe, which is right down the street from Gold's, and at the time, Mike's girlfriend happened to be in the Rose Cafe getting something to eat, and Arnold's telling him, he says, those bodybuilders think that they're gonna boycott to Mr. Olympia. He said, before it's all over with, he said, they're all gonna be kissing my ass and they'll be in the contest. And he was right. And that's why I've always said the only people that I really think had credibility then was Mike Vincer, Frank Zane, myself, and Albert Beckles, because we stood by our decision. We wasn't going to be part of it.
So were you trying to get other people to not do that show also?
Well, we had gotten together at the time, and virtually every bodybuilder that I can remember, maybe there was a couple of them that didn't sign, but we had signed an agreement. And I told Ben Weeder, I said, look, we can't agree with what's happened. I said, I don't want any part of this anymore. And Ben, he probably knew bodybuilders certainly better than I did. He says, well, do whatever you got to do. Because once again, even though with Joe and Ben, I was one of probably maybe the only bodybuilder that never, ever had a contract. Everybody else had little contract. I did tons of business with Joe and Ben, but always on the business side. And that's how we always got along. They respected me, I respected them. When they asked me to do something, I was always there. When I showed up for these promotions, I was always in shape, I did it. And never had to wonder, well, when is he going to show up? Is he late or not? I did all that. Mm-hmm. But as it turned out, they all may have signed it, but then immediately they said, well, if Mike is not going in and Frank is not going in and Boris not going in, maybe we got a chance.
Right.
I remember telling Tom Platz says, well, if we don't go in, what about my career? I said, if you don't stick together with us, nobody's going to have a career.
Right.
Right. Once again, I will give Tom Platz credit. He looked awesome. That's the best he ever looked was in
Definitely.
1981.
Yeah.
He got a contest.
How was your relationship with Mike Menser? You guys were pretty good friends, right?
Mike Menser, excuse me one second.
Sure.
Mike Menser and Frank Zan and I were good friends. And basically it kind of resulted from our common cause of the experience we had in the 1980 Mr. Olympia. I mean, I remember meeting Mike actually I was over in France when he lost. I gave an exhibition when he lost the Mr. Universe to Cal Scala.
Yeah.
That's how he and I and Danny Padilla became good friends.
Okay.
Danny, I would have to say, probably the most symmetrical, well-balanced bodybuilder I've ever saw. He had no weak points. It's a shame he was just a little on the short side. If that guy would have been 5'10", I don't think anybody would ever be.
Right.
He just, everything blended together perfectly. And a very nice, very humble guy as well. And a funny guy.
Yeah, he is a funny guy. And then Mike, you also had a good relationship with him?
Oh yeah, Mike and I had a lot of good times together. Mike and I did many seminars together. We traveled all over the place doing seminars and posing exhibitions. Yeah, we got along real well. I knew his brother, but not very well. See, there was a time after all of that, we all worked for Arthur Jones, but in a totally unrelated situation. See, believe it or not, I knew Arthur Jones since I was 9 years old.
Really?
Now, I didn't, I mean, it was just by accident, because at that time he had probably never even thought of Nautilus, but he was in importing and exporting wild animals and also flying. And he had a reptile farm in Slidell, Louisiana. So I remember driving by there on the way going to Florida, and you know, as a 9-10-year-old kid, hey Dad, man, let's stop. We got to take a break.
Right.
So go there and look at you know, he had some impressive stuff. But what people didn't realize, and I didn't get to know years later, all of those reptile farms throughout the southern states was a front. It was a front for gambling. You know, as a kid, I didn't realize. You go in and look, but they always had a big gambling card game going on in the back. But anyway, that's how and Arthur had a real distinct voice. So while I saw the guy and I didn't know who he was, I remembered that voice. So the first time Arthur called me was maybe a few months after I won the Miss America. I always remember his first call. He says, yeah, I answered the phone. He says, hey, this is Arthur Jones. He says, I got a machine down here in Florida that will build lats on a garden rake. Are you interested? Yeah. So the guy was a crackpot, you know? So, but anyway, you know, and the only reason he called me because he wanted Bill Pearl to go down there, because Pearl had been in a movie years before that Arthur had made.
Right.
And man, he said, I really don't want to go all the way to Florida. He says, look, he said, there's a new kid in Louisiana just won the Mr. America universe. Why don't you call him? So Arthur called me. And so, you know, hell, I'm game. I go down there. Hell, I helped Arthur build the first prototype on the front porch of his house.
Wow.
So we worked together for maybe a month, but I couldn't get along with him. I said, I'm going home. So that was like maybe 1970. So then again in must have been about 1982. I see Arthur at an Ursa trade show, big equipment trade show. And we were sitting there talking, and by that time we had started Body Masters, and not anywhere close to competing with Nautilus, but we were starting to eat into some of those sales. So he says, hey, he says, I want you to come to work for me. So what do you want me to do, Arthur? He says, I don't know. He says, we'll think of something. So when I go down there, I am blown away. I didn't want to get involved in equipment, but Arthur had 100,000 square foot. Are you still there, John?
Yeah.
Okay, because
Yeah, just went a little.
Yeah. He had 100,000 square foot television production studio. And I had sense enough to know, man, if I can get in on the ground floor of this, I'll be a zillionaire.
Yeah.
At the time, he had more camera equipment than ABC, NBC, and CBS combined.
Wow.
He had 9 functional studios that he could produce. So you got to remember now, this is about the same era that Turner is starting CNN.
Okay.
Now, Ted Turner's got cable. Arthur doesn't have cable, but Ted doesn't have production capabilities. Arthur had unbelievable production capabilities. So we go to Atlanta, we go see Ted Turner. He says, look, he says, I'll provide you all the production you want for all your shows. It ain't gonna cost you nothing. All I want you to do in return is run Nautilus commercials 24 hours a day. Because I'm looking around, he didn't have much in the way of stuff. I mean, CNN was just getting started in those days. So if that would have come about, I mean, but Ted turned it down. He was afraid of Arthur.
All right.
Listen, he was afraid of Arthur. Came on too strong, so that never happened. But I really believe if Arthur would have been successful in starting his cable like he wanted, he would be as big as like Fox and CNN is today.
Wow.
He was so far advanced. Let me give you an example. 1972, I'm down there. He had called me and Red to go down and look. He was just starting to put his first pullover machine with a selectorized weight stack. Before they had plate-loaded weight stacks. I'm in there talking to him. Pete Grimkowski was down there. And he was trying to win, he was trying to go for the Mr. America. So Arthur says, you know, he says, one day, he says, there won't be any more libraries anymore. He said, there won't be any books. So what do you mean? He said, you know Sears Roebuck catalog? He said, that'd be the thing of the past. I said, what do you mean, Arthur? He says, look, he says, not right now, it's too expensive. But he said, everything will be on these little discs. And they'll be just a casual purpose. Maybe $2 or $3, you'll watch it, throw it away. Just like you'd buy a magazine and throw it away. Now you got to remember, 1971, 72, VHS hadn't even come out yet.
Wow.
But he already knew about the disc, which only led me to one conclusion. Arthur, and I cannot prove this, just speculation, Arthur was involved with the CIA.
Really?
Yeah, because when I worked down there, there was constantly FBI, CIA people. G. Gordon Liddy was down there all the time. He was connected in some way. And you just don't all of a sudden go from having nothing to having more money than you know what to do with.
Right.
And knowledge grew too fast. 1970, when Casey won, you know, you remember Casey was third when he won the Mr. America, Dickerson won.
Right.
If Casey would have won that night, nobody would have complained.
Right.
He was only 18 and he was outstanding.
Right.
Okay. So that August or that September, Casey goes to New Orleans, but he was living with Arthur at the time, goes to New Orleans and wins the USA. Well, he brings the first plate-loaded pullover machine. Red Lorel paid him $300. That's the only $300 he had. That was it, $300. And you go from that to a couple of years later, he's got helicopters, he's got jets, he's got 100,000. Where the hell did all that money come from?
Yeah, right.
I mean, equipment was selling good, but it wasn't selling that good.
Right.
So once again, good story, but just my speculation.
Yeah, he was a strange character, wasn't he? For those that never met him.
He was one of the most unique individuals I've ever met. Not the most unique, but one of the most unique.
Who was the most unique?
Well, I have to tell you, the most unique individual I ever met was a guy that taught me showmanship. His name was Ben Mouton. He was an old circus performer. I met him when he was maybe mid-50s. But this guy for 15 years was a top attraction for Ringling Brothers Circus. And he came from Lafayette, Louisiana, and he was just an old broken circus. This guy had done everything. He worked in the movies with Rudolph Valentino. He had worked as a stuntman with Earl Flynn. He had done everything. I remember him telling me stories one summer, and I always wanted to get somebody to write a book on this.
Yeah, that would be fascinating.
But one summer, he loved to eat watermelon. So every afternoon after we finished working out, we go buy a watermelon. We sit there and eat and listen to his stories. He told me a different story about his life every day for 3 months. He never repeated the same story twice.
Wow.
So he was the most interesting guy I ever met by far. And he really showed me showmanship because he'd spent his whole life around carnivals and circuses. Much like Arthur. Arthur was as great and a genius as Arthur was with equipment. Arthur was the best marketing guy I've ever came across.
I almost hate to go back to the bodybuilding after all those stories.
I didn't mean to stray off on that.
No, that was great stuff. So then you go back into bodybuilding back in 1982, and that was the year Chris won, right? And at the, well, I'm sorry, we skipped 1981 because even though you didn't do the Olympia that year, you did do all the Grand Prix shows.
Yeah,
and you had looks like, I'm looking at muscle memory here, it looks like you got like 7 wins that year.
Honestly, John, I don't remember. Like I said, the contest to me was only kind of like a measuring stick.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna be honest with you. Sometimes I win a contest and I think, man, I'm doing pretty good. And I get back home and the guys that I trained with said, you didn't look near as good as you did the last time. So they'd always bring me down, to a realistic level. Because those were people that they weren't trying. I wasn't impressed, but I didn't impress them. They were just calling it like they saw it. So I respected their opinion. So that's the guys that really, when one of those guys would give me a compliment, like Red, for example. Red's a great guy, but he's very, very thin on compliments. So I can remember him when he came and said, "Hey, you look good." I remember he unknowingly at the 1979 Mr. Olympia, he shows up. I didn't even know he was there. Somehow he manages to get backstage, and he runs into me. He says, he says, "You might win this thing tonight." Well, hell, to me that was as good as me winning because he never gave me a compliment.
Right.
So that was the highlight of my. I think I might have placed third, but to me that was as good as winning. Him telling me, "Hey, you look pretty good."
The one show I remember you did, Boyer, was really interesting, was where you guys had like different pose offs. I think it was called the Canada Cup or something, and it came down to you and Chris Dickerson
That
for the
thing went
final.
on forever because you just kept paring them down. So each one of us must have posed at least a half a dozen times.
Yeah, that was a unique concept for a contest, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that was as far as that was the only time I ever
The only
remember.
time they ever did it, right?
Did that? That was the one and only time.
You
But
also go ahead.
I said I'll remember because I remember telling those guys, trying to keep those guys together. I said, Franco's going to win the '81 Olympia, and he ended up going anyway. So I didn't go, but I went over to all the Grand Prix. So I'm over they had a Grand Prix in Belgium, and then one in Wales, and then one in Montreal, all 3 within maybe 3 or 4 weeks. And I'll always remember Johnny Fuller saying, Boyer, I wish we would have listened to you. But he said you were right on the money in '81. Everybody got screwed again.
Yeah.
And I'm sure, now once again, I wasn't there, but I'm sure that probably Platts and Danny Padilla and even Roy Callender must have really been upset because those guys, along with Chris, those guys were phenomenal, in phenomenal shape that year.
Yeah, I think they were all in their best
You were there.
shape.
Who would you have given the contest to in '81? Who you thought should have?
I thought Platts was going to win, and I actually thought Roy Callender would have been second. Even though Danny looked outstanding, I thought Danny looked a little small next to the other guys, But by himself, he looked incredible.
Oh, yeah.
But I would have had those 3 in the top 3.
He was good.
And I thought Chris was going to take 4th. I would have had Franco no higher than 5th just because he had no legs,
Yeah, it was always a mystery to me, but it's what it is,
Yeah.
But I will say this: I mean, there's nothing worse to me than when you win a contest and deep down inside you don't deserve to win.
Yeah.
I mean, he must have, even though he wouldn't admit it, he must know deep down inside, hey, I didn't deserve that.
Yeah.
To me, that would be, I was terrible.
So then in '82, then you went back into the Olympia, and that was the year that that Chris won.
Right.
Chris Dickerson won. But weren't you working also with Arthur that year?
No.
Arthur Jones? No.
No. Everybody thinks that.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Correct the record. Everybody thinks that, and they always say, "Oh, well, boy, you look terrible," and I did look terrible. Okay, but it had nothing to do with Arthur Jones. I didn't start work. I didn't go back to work with Arthur Jones until January of '83.
Okay.
So what exactly happened in '82? And this is the first time I've ever had an opportunity to tell this. '82, I said, okay, I'm going to come back. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to get as lean and as muscular. I'm going to try and emulate Frank Zane. I'm going to be like that. What happened that year, the guy at the gym says, oh man, he says, I got this great diet pill. And he says, this is going to help you out. So it was called, I don't remember the pharmaceutical name, but it was called Fastin. Well, hell, it was speed, but I didn't realize it. So my training partner and I started taking it. And I mean, it was just like Ritalin. You just talk up a storm. You'd feel, look, I only slept 4 hours a night that whole year because I was running 3 businesses, working out, doing cardio, and I just felt wonderful. And it ate all the fat away, but it ate all the muscle away too.
Wow.
Okay, so that's what happened. It was everybody said, "Oh well, boy, he didn't take anything," and it just ate the muscle and everything away. Okay, so '82's over with. I decided, okay, I'm going to get in with Arthur. I want to learn this cable television business. So I immediately stopped it. So I was so depressed for about 6 months. I couldn't figure out what. I felt like I wanted to cry all the time. Jesus, what is this? So time goes by, it gets out of your system, you wear off. So eventually, I guess in May of '84, I moved. Arthur and I end up having a dispute, so I leave Nautilus, come back to California. Immediately when I come back to California, I look up my old training partner. So one day we're talking, I said, hey, do you remember that fasting we were taking? He said, yeah. He said, he said, after I got off of that stuff, he said, I was so depressed I'd cry all the time. I said, well, that's it. That's what happened to it. I said, it was the after effect of that.
Right,
so that's what happened. You get to believe, wow, I'm so cut and everything. You don't realize you ain't got any muscle left. But that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so naturally, '83. Once again, I didn't do anything. I was involved with Arthur. So then '84, I felt I was done. I had no interest in bodybuilding. So I'm sitting in the movie theater. I'll never will forget this. And I'm watching this movie with Robert Redford called The Natural.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw it.
Yeah.
Great movie. Very inspirational. So I'm thinking, that inspired me to do something. I'm going to try one more time. And I went back in '84, but once again, I made a mistake. I came in too heavy. I would try to go the opposite route, and that's the year that Lee Haney won. He looked magnificent, and then he had a long run. He was talking as another nice guy, Lee Haney.
Yeah. I was going to ask you what your thoughts were with Lee Haney and seeing someone new like that come up, another young guy come up and win the Olympia.
He was exceptional. He was very, very good. And once again, just like Bill Pearl, nice guy. All his fame never changed him. Humble guy, easy to get along with. I have tremendous respect for Lee Haney.
What did you think about that contest in general, Boyer? Because that was the year that Sergio also came back.
Sergio came back. That was the interesting thing there, and it was held in the Felt Forum in New York. Everybody, the thing was, Lee Haney was a deserving winner.
Yeah.
But everybody wanted Sergio to win.
Yeah.
I was hoping he would win.
Right.
I mean, he was past his prime, but my God, it was Sergio. There's only one.
Yeah.
And he had, how can I say this? Some people just have natural charisma, and Sergio had it. And by far, he certainly had the coolest clothes anybody ever wore. I'm sure you saw it.
Oh, yeah.
Everything was tailored to a T. He dressed so much better than everybody else, and he always had all those gobs of jewelry, big gold bracelet, big medallion. He was quite a character.
Yeah, he was. I'm glad I got to meet him when I was living in
Well,
Chicago.
he was one of a kind.
So then, competitively, then it wasn't until 10 years later when you went to the Masters Mr. Olympia in 1994.
That's true. Well, the funny thing about the Masters Mr. Olympia, that was a contest that was created specifically for Lou Ferrigno.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wasn't fortunate enough to win the Mr. Olympia. So they wanted to, he pounded and hammered Joe, you got to have a contest. So they created a Masters Mr. Olympia. But they made one mistake, okay? So originally it was going to be 45 years. You had to be 45 years or older.
Okay.
Well, it turned out Lou was only 42, so he couldn't compete. So, oh man, we got to change the rules. So they changed the rules. Everybody knew that Louis was going to win.
Right.
You know, when they invited me, I said, sure, I'll compete in it because I just want to see if I can really get in good shape one more time. Which, and I think I told you this, that was the most satisfying thing for me because at age 48, I thought that was the best shape I'd ever been. Certainly the biggest shape I was in. I think I weighed 225, 228
Wow.
the day of the contest. And that was, and I carried a lot of definition and muscularity, you know. And, and Louis was good, but Robbie was better.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, Louis took that extremely hard. Boy, that upset him because he wanted that contest. And like I told him, I said when we had the competitors meeting, I said, "Hey, ain't but $25,000 prize money.
Right.
So let's all get together and do this, okay? Whoever wins gets the pot, gets $25,000, because it all costs us more time and money away from business and everything to get ready for the contest." Well, everybody kind of went along with it except Robbie. So Robbie immediately after the meeting runs to Joe and says, "Joe, Boyer wants to give the winner of the contest all the money. That's not fair." So when the contest is over, I said, "You know what? You know what you did, Robbie? You just screwed yourself out of $15,000.
Yeah.
Because I think the winner only got 10, and the rest of the money was divided up." Well, I mean, you go for the love of the contest, not for the money.
Right.
And maybe it's different today. The prize money is a lot bigger, so maybe that's a motivating factor. But you still, I mean, it's the same reason I get up and train. I'm in the gym at 5 o'clock every morning. You still got to have the passion for it.
Yeah.
You don't have that passion, you ain't never going to get anywhere.
Right.
And that's anything in life.
So tell us about your training for that show then, Boyer. How did you make such improvements and compete better than ever?
Okay, well, two things. One, I changed my routine, okay, to kind of coincide with what Dorian was doing, you know, high intensity training, but modified a little bit. And I took liberal amounts of steroids and growth hormone. That made a big difference.
Okay.
You know, that helped me out a whole lot. That made a huge difference. I mean, I will be one of the first ones. I'll never deny it. And here again, I just happened to be in the right spot at the right time. I was introduced to steroids back when I was 17.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Diana Ball first came out. It was hardly anybody knew about it. And I only happened to know about it because Dr. John Ziegler, who invented it, was friends with Alvin Roy. Alvin Roy was one of the coaches that set up the Olympic teams when they went to Europe. When he found out, when Dr. Ziegler talked to the Russians or whoever, found out what they were using, he came back, got SIBA to develop Diana Ball. Okay, if you're probably too young, you don't remember this, but Hoffman was promoting isometrics. Do you remember isometrics?
I remember isometrics. I didn't know Hoffman was promoting that.
Okay, Hoffman was the one that promoted isometrics, straining against an immovable bar, and everybody was getting so strong.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh man, these guys were just breaking world records. It wasn't because of isometrics. It was because of Dianabol. One of the guys who held the world record at the time was Lou Ricky from New Orleans. He had a 300-pound or more than 300-pound snatch in a 181-pound class. It was the little blue pills. It was a Dianabol.
Right.
Also, Alvin Roy, back in the late 50s, was coaching the LSU football team. LSU was killing everybody. They won the national championship several times. Why? Well, first of all, they were weight trained. First weight trained football team in the country, also taking Dianabol. So this guy I told you about earlier, Ken Gilbo, who was the first guy that designed an exercise program, he was playing on that football team. So I overheard him telling these guys, I'm thinking, Jesus, that might be a secret. So in those days, all you had to do was go to a doctor, give you a script.
Right.
And that stuff worked. So that helped me out. So I never denied that. I looked at it, hey, it was just like protein. If it helps you out, I'm going to try it. I mean, you got to remember, as a kid, I wanted to be big. I wanted to be strong. Hell, I would have ate dog shit if it would have helped me get bigger, you know?
Right.
And that's the way most bodybuilders feel. You want to be big. You want to be successful. And I think that holds true of any athlete. You want to try to get the best at whatever you want to do.
Yeah. And we did an interview with Bill Grant, and he said that back then the drug usage was much less. The guys would only take it before competition 3 months before the show, and then they would stay off for the rest of the year. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. In other words, when I took the Dianabol, the thing, I mean, you go back, hell, even John Grimmick took Dianabol.
Yeah.
And he was disappointed because, in the same thing, it made me stronger, but I don't think I ever gained more than 10 pounds. I mean, it wasn't like I gained an enormous amount of weight. The people today, take all different sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I'm not criticizing, because maybe if all that stuff would have been available, we would have done it too. Who knows? Because everybody wants to try and get to the best that they can be. But yeah, it was, nobody took very much. I remember talking to Don Howarth, who's another great bodybuilder. I mean, he got in great shape. He was taking, I think it was like 5 or maybe 10 milligrams of Dianabol. I don't think maybe Larry Scott ever took more than 20 milligrams of Dianabol. Look what the phenomenal shape that he got.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember talking to John Grimmick. He says, I really didn't care for Dianabol. He says, I got stronger, but he says, I didn't notice that much about it. So after maybe a 6-week period of time, he never took it again,
Are you surprised with how big the guys are today, Boyer?
Well, the thing that confuses me is, and it probably is a combination, and I'm not up on everything, but for example, growth hormone, I don't really think growth hormone does that much for you other than metabolize body fat. I don't think it really will add a lot of muscle, but I think in combination with that and the steroid, it'll probably work pretty good. But if I've been told that if you take a considerable amount of growth hormone, a period of time, it causes everything to grow. So it means the intestines will grow, which causes a lot of guys to have a really thick trunk, a thick torso.
Right.
I mean, the guys that I admired, as I'm sure I've told you, Sergio Oliva, Steve Reeves, guys like that. The guy to me that one of the all-time best guys that had a V-taper was this guy, Brian Buchanan. I don't know if you remember.
Oh, sure.
Oh, fantastic V-taper. I really liked him. But they don't seem to have that anymore. I will say this, and I'm not trying to make light of the guys today, that's not at all. But in my day, a bodybuilder, regardless who it was, could walk out in a silhouette. And just that silhouette, you could recognize, oh, that's Paul Gillette, or that's Chris Dickerson, or that's Frank Zane. Today, they all come out, they just kind of look like a bunch of blocks. But one thing I definitely, if I would be critical today about the bodybuilders today, 2 things I can criticize about. There ain't a damn one of them out there that knows how to pose.
Right.
There's no transition. And the one thing I don't understand, if you're good, the audience is going to let you know you're good. What is this deal about everybody,
Right.
What does that mean? That's ridiculous. I see guys do all that. That's embarrassing. If you're good, the audience is going to let you know. If you ain't good, they ain't going to say anything.
Yeah.
Get your ass off the stage, But why do people do that? That's amazing to me.
What's even worse about Boyer is that's trickling down to the amateur level, and all the amateur shows I see, you see it all the time. Guys are going like this, or they're going like this.
They're going to copy what they see the professionals do.
Right.
That's exactly it. Another thing I don't read the bodybuilding magazines anymore. Occasionally, when I'm at the market, I'll pass by the magazine rack. What is with? I don't understand the covers of the magazines anymore. I mean, I can recall fantastic covers that Zeller took of, like, say, Dave Draper and Larry Scott up in the magnificent photographs. Hell, had a nice smile on their face. Okay. All the guys today on the cover of the magazines look like they're constipated. All this growling and all this stuff.
Yeah.
What is that? Does that make you want to buy the magazine? I don't think so.
I don't know. It's a whole different world now, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Boyer, I think we talked for a couple hours. I want to thank you very much for your interview. I think we could talk a lot more even. You had some great stories, and I appreciate, the great contribution you made to the sport. I always thought you were a classy individual, and you were a great competitor, and I enjoyed watching you in all those Mr. Olympias and reading your stories, and it was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, John. I enjoyed talking to you. You have a wonderful day.
All right, Boyer. You too.
You too.
All right, thanks again for joining us for the Bodybuilding Legends Show. Thanks again to Boyer Coe for an excellent interview. I really appreciate his time. Join us next week where we're going to be joined by Sean Ray, one of the top bodybuilders in the 1990s. Sean was a bodybuilding prodigy, winning the 1987 Nationals at only 22 years old, and then placing in the top 5 in 13 consecutive Mr. Olympia competitions. An incredible career. So join us next week for part 1 of our interview with Sean Ray on the Bodybuilding Legends Show. Take care, everybody.